Robson Radio is the official podcast of the University of Manitoba's Faculty of Law. This podcast is recorded on the original lands of the Anishinaabeg, Ininawuk, Anishinaabe, Dakota, Oyate, and on the national homeland of the Red River Métis. This podcast comes to you from the MLT Aikens classroom at Robson Hall and was created using equipment kindly sponsored by MLT Aikens. The goal of Robson Radio is to tell the story of Western Canada's oldest law school in Manitoba. Each episode features an interview with one of our professors, directors, staff, students, or alumni, or special guests, all of whom make our law school an exciting, relevant, innovative, and transformational place to be. Welcome to episode 3 with guest host Stacey Soldier, who is interviewing Toronto lawyer Marie Henein. Marie is visiting Robson Hall to give the Harry Walsh OCQC lecture on March 3rd, 2025. Stacey is a senior associate lawyer at Manitoba law firm Cochrane Sinclair LLP and is from the Gabiskagamag community, also known as Swan Lake First Nation. She graduated from the Faculty of Law at the University of Manitoba in 2007 and was called to the Manitoba Bar in 2008. Her legal practice includes trial litigation in criminal law and child protection law. She is highly experienced in representing victims of sexual violence in 276 and 278 Criminal Code applications. Stacey served as co-counsel for the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs at the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, contributing to a landmark investigation aimed at justice and healing for Indigenous communities. Since 2019, she has been a practicing professional instructor here at Robson Hall, where she mentors future legal minds through her teachings in criminal justice, family law, and indigeneity, as well as her annual seminar on Indigenous peoples and the criminal justice system. Outside of her legal practice, Stacey is currently serving as vice president of the Manitoba Bar Association, and she will become the first Anishinaabe woman to hold the role of president in 2025. She is also the past president of the Elizabeth Fry Society of Manitoba.
Hello and welcome to this special episode of Robson Radio. My name is Stacey Soldier and it is my great pleasure to be interviewing Marie Henein. Marie is in Winnipeg as the keynote speaker at this evening's Harry Walsh KC Lectures, which will be given in the law school's moot courtroom named after Mr. Harry Walsh. We are so pleased to have you join us here. Please allow me to introduce you. Marie Henein is a founding partner of Henein, Hutchison, Robitaille LLP and is recognized as one of the country's top litigators. Her practice focuses on civil litigation, criminal litigation, commercial litigation, mediation, and arbitration. She has been interviewed repeatedly by the media, written for the Globe and Mail, and is a sought-after public speaker. In 2003, Ms. Henein was a recipient of the Laura Legge Award from the Law Society of Upper Canada and the Law Society of Upper Canada Medal. In 2017, she received the Law Society Medal for outstanding service to the administration of justice. In 2023, Ms. Henein was the chosen recipient of the G. Arthur Martin Medal. Most recently, in 2024, she was awarded a Doctorate of Laws by the Law Society of Upper Canada. Marie Henein authored her best-selling memoir, Nothing But the Truth, and is co-editor of Martin's Criminal Code, Martin's Annual Criminal Practice, and Martin's Related Criminal Statute, and the associate editor of the Canadian Criminal Cases. I just want to say, Marie, if I can call you that.
Yes, please.
Your work has made you an icon, not just to female defense lawyers or lawyers in general, but the practice of law in a whole. For me, when you advocate, one of the things that makes me such an admirer is that every time you advocate, it shows years of prep, study, and passion. And a lesson I took from your book is that there's no half measures when you're dealing with people's lives. It's balls to the wall, all in, no stone unturned. And so just being able to have this conversation with you is such a thrill. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes. So we're all looking forward to hearing your talk this evening. I understand that you're going to be discussing the role of the criminal defense lawyer in the Canadian justice system. So let's start with something related to that. I've gotten this. You had several interviews over the years where you've been asked this question, but we often field the question like, how can you represent this awful person? As though it makes us on par with that person. I've represented people who have ended up being convicted murderers. That doesn't mean I'm all for murder, but sometimes that's a hard concept for the public to understand. How do you field questions like that?
I think it really depends on who's asking them, Stacey, because if it's a member of the public, I get it. They don't necessarily understand what we're trying to achieve in the justice system. I don't, and that's fair. We don't do a good job of explaining it. It's very easy to conflate the lawyer with either the crime or the person that they are defending. And so for members of the public, I think it's a bit of a different explanation. And you need to talk a little bit about what the role of a defense lawyer is, why it's necessary in a democratic system. I think it is important to understand and explain that the criminal law in particular is generally visited most fiercely on the marginalized. That is the history of it, and it has been misused in a lot of ways. And I think when you have those dialogues, the dialogues I've had with members of the public, it's really fascinating and a positive conversation. You know, where I really don't like that question coming from is coming from other lawyers or coming from students, law students. And you'd be surprised how often I'm asked that question by law students. Because you should know what the justice system is about and why we do the job that we do, why you do the job that you do, and why it is important to represent people who are charged with crimes.
Mm-hmm. And one of the answers that I've developed over the years in teaching is that I really believe in the system. However flawed it is, this system is important, the checks and balances, because we could be on a slippery slide, and some other countries in the world perhaps are, to where agents of the state can come into your home and put a bag over your head and drag you out, and the next thing your family hears is that you've been killed in the town square. The reason why we have these systems, from my perspective, is that the power of the state is so powerful, and there has to be the checks and balances. But it is concerning that you hear that, and I certainly hear that from other lawyers and certainly students over the years.
It's really interesting. I think, you know, as lawyers, we understand what the power of the state is like and what it feels like when it's pointed at you. When we represent people, it doesn't matter how rich they are, it is no match. It's simply no match for the state. And it's certainly no match for people who are marginalized and don't have those resources. But I think it is a bit of an abstract concept unless you've had that experience. Unless you've been pulled over by a police officer, you don't necessarily know how intimidating that is. Unless you've been put in a cell, you don't know what that feels like. Unless you've had your phone and your privacy intervened with, or as you say, you know, people knocking your door down and searching your home or falsely accusing you, you don't know what that feels like. So the power of the state is real and it's significant, and the justice system serves as a very important check on that.
And then further to that, we have people who should know better. And you may have heard in Manitoba, there was an incident in this past fall where the provincial government removed an MLA from caucus. Using a main reason for removing the person was his connection to a law firm where one of his colleagues was representing a high-profile accused person as their defense counsel. Would you be able to comment on that? And certainly, how do we educate our government leaders about our roles as defense lawyers in the justice system?
Well, you're hitting on all the things that annoy me today, Stacey, and that's actually one of the worst. And I've spoken a lot about this, and you might hear a little bit about it today later. And that is when elected officials and protectors of democracy in our democratic institutions don't respect the institutions that are so fundamental to our foundational principles. That's really concerning. So for a government to remove somebody because either they personally acted for someone as a defense lawyer or their partner did, says to the public that there's something wrong with that there is something dirty about it, that there's something immoral about representing people charged by the government, by the state. And that is such a fundamental misunderstanding of what we're all about, a fundamental misunderstanding of the Charter. I mean, we value counsel so much that there's a right to counsel, to consult with counsel when police want to engage with members of the public. So it's shocking. It's shocking behavior. It's profoundly misinformed, and it's really done to do one thing, right? It's designed to pander to members of the public who may not understand this and to think, well, you know what, this is a good way to show that I should get a quick vote. It's terrible conduct. It really is shocking and disrespectful to the country, in my view.
Mm-hmm. And not only that, when we look at the government leaders and government officials, a question that's often asked is, well, what do we do about this high rate of crime? It's not even high rate of crime now. It's serious crime that's being committed. And the answer always seems to be pandering to this base of, well, let's lock them up. Because really, hey, let's get more resources for housing and addictions. That's not really a sexy sell from the government's perspective in terms of trying to get votes. What more should these government leaders be doing in terms of their learning about what the actual issues are? Or is it that they know it, but they just don't care?
Oh, no, I think they know it. I'm sure you've seen this so many times that they'll make these outrageous statements about crime and violent crime on the increase, and then you'll say, well, the stats don't support that, and they don't want to hear it. Or the types of violent crime that are, what's categorized as a violent crime, they don't want to hear it. They don't want to be informed. We used to have law reform commissions, but they don't care about it at all. And this lock them up mentality is something that, again, is visited on a certain population. I mean, we have mass incarceration in Canada exists with the Indigenous population. Report after government report have identified this problem, have identified this as a problem of over-policing, of over-incarcerating, of denying bail. There's a catalog of problems. And that's not a winning proposition for the government to say, well, we're going to reassess this. We're going to look at what we're doing. We're going to look at over-policing. What you hear is actually the contrary. What you hear is we got to have less bail. We heard that not only from the Conservatives, but then mimicked and echoed by the Liberals. So the reason that's done is because it costs nothing. It costs nothing to pass another law that incarcerates more people. At the back end, it costs the society more. The cost of incarceration is quite high. It's higher than drug treatment. It's higher than housing. And the problem is that when people say that, people who are actually working in the system, who are educated, who understand what it is. And by that, I include defense lawyers, Crown attorneys, judges, anyone who's in the system knows what the reality of all this is. It's just not a way to get votes. And so, what you see the government doing is they will resource police because that one is acceptable, but they will not increase the judges. They will not resource Crown attorneys more, and we know they will not resource legal aid because that's something that's not politically palatable. So these get tough on crime agendas are just a vote getter. They're not real. This is not real.
Right. You talked about over-policing, and I think in Toronto there was the issue of carding. Right. In Manitoba and Winnipeg in particular, many formal faculty and practicing professionals, such as myself, when we talk about over-policing and under-protecting of racialized people in Winnipeg, there's it's not a joke, but it certainly is a joke that there's a certain type of offense that only people in the inner city who are racialized get charged with. You're not going to find this out in the suburbs in the nicer area, and that's being on the sidewalk with a bicycle that's larger than a specific amount. I've had a challenge to my students that when you're practicing criminal defense, if you can find a case that a person in the suburbs has their police report has started off with that, please show me, because it's never happened. So essentially what goes on is a person is riding their bike on the sidewalk, and that's pretext for stopping that person, for checking their name, for doing a pat down. On average, when I was practicing criminal law exclusively, if I were to get 40 new files in a month, probably 28 of them would start like that.
That's outstanding.
So
That's shocking.
what sort of comment do you have in relation to that?
Well, again, that's the reality of often criminal law, and people who practice in it know it. But, members of the public might not understand that. So, in Manitoba, it's a certain racialized community, we know. The Indigenous community is targeted in the West. In Toronto, yes, also the Indigenous community, but also other racialized groups. And that car stops are also pretext stops. And if you're a white person driving a nice car, you're not going to get pulled over. It's pretty rare. But if you're a racialized person, good chance that you're going to get pulled over. We know this. We know what the stats are and what the numbers are. And you're right, there are certain offenses that only certain types of people are charged with. But we see that also, for example, with drug offenses, right? Particularly often low-level drug offenses is a way to control certain populations, and there's a history to that. It's not accidental.
Right. And then going further to this entire agenda of, well, lock them up, Harry Walsh, one of his important legacies was the abolishment of
Capital punishment.
Capital punishment, exactly. So one of Harry Walsh's important legacies is the abolition of capital punishment in 1976. So imagine if we are in that time where the political thought is lock them up, throw away the key, but also we have capital punishment. And I don't think the public really realizes how often wrongfully convicted, whether it's murder or even the lower offenses, how much that actually happens, and particularly where we have people who plead guilty to charges that they shouldn't be pleading guilty, but for whatever reason they are entering their guilty pleas.
Well, we know there have been so many wrongful convictions in Canada, so many high-profile cases where the members of the public see that up close. Recently, the Premier of Ontario, while speaking to, I guess, a police association, joked that, he said he was joking, that capital punishment should come back. And that sort of language, I think we need to think about whether the public really would be outraged by it, because what's happening is a bit of a different tolerance now, I think, in the public mind. And, some people may be of the view that that's just a risk I'm prepared to take if it's going to make me safer. Now, the problem, of course, is that capital punishment doesn't make you safer. The threat of it doesn't make you safer. Because you need to understand how often these crimes are committed, and they're not committed often by people who are calculating and sane or not on drugs or alcohol. So normally you're not at your best self when you're committing these crimes, and you're not going to be that deliberate. So this idea that there's a deterrent effect, we also know that the reality is there's very little deterrent effect by the threat of punishment for most offenses.
Right. And just pivoting in terms of your practice, you've been practicing for a number of years, and there's probably times where getting to the office, having to deal with another case, it gets a little tough. So how do you remain a constant and solid advocate for your client? What are some of the things that you do for yourself, either personally or in your practice, to ensure that you're at your best?
Well, first of all, that's so personal to everybody in terms of how they deal with it. For me, if I'm coming up on a case that I think is going to be very consuming, I tend to really strip everything else away to be able to focus and to be rested to do it. And so everything else just has to sort of recede in the background, and that includes other obligations as well. So I allow myself the opportunity to really focus. What I would say is that after those times, as you know, and it's absolutely exhausting to do those cases or to have lengthy cases, you just need some time to get your energy back and to recover. And sadly, I've been at this for over 3 decades. As you get older, you get more tired. So you may need a bit more of a runway. You got to take care of yourself because it's tough work, right? We do not work in an environment which is a feel-good environment. You're dealing with people in crisis. You're dealing with awful stuff. The stuff you're looking at and dealing with all day is profoundly difficult. And so that wears on people, whether you're a Crown or a police officer or a judge or defense lawyer. If you're in that business, it wears on you and your personality, and you just have to try to take care of yourself.
Right. That's really good advice. And I think this law school in particular, we had the law school had Myrna McCallum here talking about trauma, but also talking about self-care. And that's more of a push. And certainly in Manitoba, we have Lawyer Strong. And so the idea of mental health and caring for yourself is really at the forefront of both Law Society, Manitoba Bar Association, as well as the law school, which even me going to law school 15, 20 years ago, that wasn't the idea at all. The idea was you get your nose to the ground and just grind it out. I always tell the story of when I was articling and I actually had meningitis, but I didn't know I had it. I just kept going to court and thought I had a bad headache. And it was not until the end of the week where I finally went to the hospital. And I thought I could have spread that to anybody. I could have been very sick, and that was my lesson there of like having to take care of myself.
Well, I think the profession is getting a little bit better about talking about these sorts of issues and also mental health issues. There is a great book published by a number of lawyers in Ontario talking about their own personal experiences, and so I think it's less. Perhaps there's a little bit less stigma around it. I wish there was much more less stigma around it. I don't know if that's an awkward sentence, but it is becoming something that people are prepared to talk about and to talk about how you deal with it and how you handle it. And certainly not a marker of weakness at all. It's no different than any other type of illness that somebody has. So I think the legal profession is getting a little bit more progressive about it, but we've got a ways to go.
Oh, absolutely. And turning to your book, which I have on my Kobo, and then I also got it as a gift 2 times. So I have 3 copies in total. But one of the important things that you had talked about was women in the profession and the difficulty of staying in the profession, because in particular, criminal defense and leaving the profession. And so what sort of comment, we talked about the profession coming a long way, but we clearly have more ways to go, because I know in Manitoba, we lose a lot of really great criminal defense lawyers to the Crown's office, or they just leave practice and don't come back at all.
The exodus of women, which multiple bar associations and law societies have looked at, continues, and it's across the board. The criminal defense is a problem, a particular type of problem, but in other forms of litigation and civil and corporate, you see the same exodus. And there are a lot of reasons for it, but I think one of the most significant reasons is nothing to do with maternity leave or any of the stuff that I think these associations focus incorrectly on, and it's not about work-life balance. It's about feeling welcome, right? Feeling supported, feeling that you have a pathway to success. Because, if you have to fight all the time, not only for your client but for yourself, it's an exhausting experience. And to constantly prove your value and prove your worth and explain why you are where you are is tiring. And we fail as a profession to encourage women, to give them those pathways, to give them access to clients. When it comes to criminal defense, part of the problem is that it is a business. As a defense lawyer, you're generally not in a 100-person firm or 200-person firm. You're running your own business. And how do you run a business? Well, you need clients. There are financial obligations. if you're not promoted by your colleagues, if you're not seen, if you're not getting referrals, if people don't want to elevate you, well, sure, what do you do after a while? You say, okay, well, this doesn't work. I want some security, and so I will leave that profession. And so you see it both from the defense side, and you see it in civil and commercial, where it's an old boys network that is stunning. It's inhospitable. And we really need to think about that. We really need to think about what message we're sending women who have stood shoulder to shoulder with men in law school, who have excelled, who have put their 7-8 years in to be in the profession, to tell them, really what you should be thinking about is your family obligations and how you're going to balance it all, and all those pressures. And we're going to do absolutely nothing to promote you, to facilitate you, to make you successful in this profession. I have never met a person who felt fulfilled and successful in a profession who said, I'm out, I'm going. You're going because you're being shown the door, because it's inhospitable, because it's so difficult and emotionally trying to break into a boys' club. And I speak from a bit of experience. It's exhausting.
No, it absolutely is. And I remember, this is still a sitting justice, but I remember having a very serious criminal trial, and I had a junior male who was only about 2 years out, and the Crown, she was junior, but she had a very senior Crown male, and the justice would direct his questions to the males. Mm-hmm. And my junior was great because he would shake his head and point at me mm-hmm. and not even stand up to the podium. And the Crown and her and I would text after hours, because it was the first time it happened, I thought, well, that's a little bit weird. But throughout the 5 or 6 day trial, it happened almost every time. Yeah. And it was crazy to me that in like 2016 or 2017 that this was actually happening, where I was almost like a pat on the head, like, sit down, little lady, I'm going to talk to the lawyers in this room. And so it was shocking to me.
Yeah, I think, as the bench changes, the composition of the bench changes, there is hopefully a bit less of that as it gets younger as well. It helps. But yes, those subtle and not so subtle types of treatments are frustrating, right? And they're demoralizing, because you're trying to do your job for your client and you're having to navigate this for your client, right? It's in your client's interest that you be addressed appropriately and that you be given the respect that you deserve. It's not just a personal thing, it's for your client. Right. And so those sorts of frustrations, you hear them, I hear them all the time. It's still there. Yeah.
Absolutely. The other piece of that is the mentorship, and you talk about how important mentorship is. Harry Walsh talked about that throughout his career, and certainly that's something that I've talked to my students and other students. I have a mentee right now, and so we're gearing up to get her resume ready, and she's going to be doing the articling interview soon. So that's really important. So what comments do you have in terms of the mentorship that you were lucky to have, and what's your view on that in terms of what I say is you open that door, but you hold it open and put your hand out to help somebody through the door as well?
I think the profession has really come a long way in terms of mentorship and formal mentorship. I was very lucky because I worked with Eddie Greenspan and Mark Rosenberg, and so I had an up-close and personal view of what you need to do to be a good lawyer, and they were always available to me, and Eddie always was available for me to harass him and bug him and get his advice on stuff. And so I was able to watch. It was apprenticeship not mentorship. It was apprenticeship, like in the real traditional way, where you were right there and you were getting the benefit of learning all this stuff. Nowadays I think we have more formal mentorship. We certainly have it in our office, and you see it across the board. And it is so important because I don't know how you felt, but I didn't know any lawyers when I went to law school. I had no connections to anybody. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know anything about the career path. I really didn't. I didn't know you're supposed to go do this, or you're supposed to go have a summer position. I mean, I worked at Swiss Chalet in my first year of law school, so I just didn't understand. I just had no history of that. And so mentorship is really, really important, because it's also an opportunity to have honest conversations with people about what it looks like, what certain types of areas of law look like, how to advance your career, how to deal with difficult issues that we all deal with as lawyers. And I think it's absolutely, absolutely critical. I really do. I think it's so important and helpful to be able to talk to somebody and say, you know, what's going on here? How does this really work?
And like you, I didn't know any lawyers. There was nobody in my family my dad was the first person from our reserve to be accepted into university and go to university. And so I remember that time where I thought, I'm going to write the LSAT, but I don't want to talk about it. I don't want people to know. I don't want someone to tell me that I couldn't do it, because I'm telling myself that all the time. The law school in the last couple of years have had an event, and it really was the students, the Black Students Association and the Indigenous Students Association have an event called See Yourself Here. And so that was just this week. Great. And there was like a high school student from an inner city school who was here, took the bus here all by herself, an Indigenous young lady. And right away, all the aunties, all the matriarchs, all the Indigenous women who were there, we kind of took her into our group, and we were chatting with her and talking to her. And oh my gosh, if I would have had that would have been so meaningful, because one of the things I talk about in law school is there was me and one other Indigenous student. We kind of huddled together, and I had other friends and everything, but nobody had the same sort of experiences that I did. That on one hand, yes, I'm in this law school for this amazing old profession, but the other hand, I have family members who are dying of drug overdoses and funerals and lots of trauma. And so the idea, even when I graduated, when I got my call to the bar, that, wow, I'm in this profession and I still don't really see people like me. It's very hard. And so the mentorship is super important. And whether it's an Indigenous lawyer, for me, there was plenty of other people who took the time to be amazing role models on how I wanted to be as a lawyer and a person. And so when you talk about that, that is so important.
It is important. I think also visibility is important, because you talk about this young girl, a young student, who would not necessarily see herself in that way. So seeing somebody that has done it makes it possible, right? That's what's so important about it. It's that it not only sends a message, it says, well, there's a pathway to this. And if you're not exposed to that, if you don't see it, then you don't know how you get there. You don't know where to begin and where to end. That's pretty powerful. It's a pretty powerful message. And so I always say this, certainly to women, that visibility is really important. It is important for you to be seen by other women.
Yeah. And further to that, for women, particularly racialized and Indigenous women, I had seen a quote during the American election from Michelle Obama, which really resonated with me when she was talking about Kamala Harris. And it was this. She said, Kamala understands that most of us will never be afforded the grace of failing forward and upward. We will never benefit from the affirmative action of generational wealth. If we bankrupt a business, we don't get a second, third, or fourth chance. If things don't go our way, we don't have the luxury of whining or cheating others to get further. We don't get the chance to change the rules so that we always win. If we see a mountain ahead of us, we didn't expect there to be an escalator waiting to take us to the top. We put our heads down and do the work.
I remember that. I remember my favorite part of that was the affirmative action of generational wealth. I love that, and it's so relevant now, particularly in terms of what's happening in the United States. And it's powerful. There, as you see, for me, anti-immigrant sentiment. I'm an immigrant. You see anti-racialized sentiment towards racialized people, and you understand what it takes. And you're right. You don't get the pass. You don't get there's, not a lot of safety net for a lot of people. I do remember her saying that. I thought she just killed it when she spoke. But that line in particular, the affirmative action of generational wealth, I thought was just so powerful.
Right. And so for a lot of, I think, Indigenous students, racialized students, immigrant students who come here, coming into the practice, it can be, it's so foreign. I grew up in the North in a working class union town, and I'm very proud of that. I didn't grow up in my home community. And I remember going to an event at Federation's conference. I was a third-year lawyer or so about that time. And I saw this, circle thing with crackers, so I thought I'd give it a try, and it was liver pate. Never had it, and I was like, this is really good, to the next person over. And she's not a lawyer here anymore, but she kind of looked at it and said, oh, I've been eating that my whole life, and then turned her head. And I remember thinking, oh, good for you.
Yeah.
The first time I had sushi, I was in law school. So these are just not the experiences that I've had in terms of having, a cottage or going away for skiing and things like that.
Right.
But the face of the law is changing here in Manitoba in terms of the students and the diversity that we have. I think last year, out of the 100 new students, there was 17 Indigenous students who had come in. But I think having diversity in our practice only strengthens it, at least from my perspective.
Well, it does, because law is a profoundly subjective discipline. And, many of the things that judges, for example, or lawyers, but let's focus on judges, decide are informed by their own life experience, by their personal experience. So, if you have never had the experience of being stopped and frisked, or you don't know what it is to get stopped because you're riding a bicycle as a pretext stop, then that is completely foreign to you. So when you expand the life experiences, and they're more diverse, in particularly in the judiciary, but also in the bar, I think we get a richer and more accurate picture of what life is like in this country and what we need to do better.
So that is the end of our session, and thank you so much for spending the time with me today, and I'm looking forward to your lecture this evening.
Thank you.